Howdy, folks. Welcome back to another episode of the Texas SignalCast. I'm your host, Joe Desotel, and I'm here with my co-host, Jessica Montoya Coggins. Hello, Jessica.
Hey, Joe.
Well, so the Texas abortion ban is back in the news, and this time it could be sort of a silver lining for us. Can you tell us what happened? You wrote a story about this on texassignal.com earlier this week.
Sure. So this case was in front of a federal judge, Robert Pittman, and he has basically ruled it's a temporary injunction. So he took sharp criticism, actually, at the Supreme Court for even allowing this bill to sort of be in effect. It has been on the books since September 1st. This is, of course, the extreme anti-abortion bill, Senate Bill 8. It's essentially a 6-week abortion ban, but it also has this really sort of legal minefield that it's created in that it allows virtually anyone to sue somebody who has aided or abetted an abortion. So right now it is temporarily blocked. We should note that even though that's a good thing, even for abortion providers, there's still it's not sort of clear if services are going to resume. And that's because there is a clause in Senate Bill 8 that basically says that in this exact situation, if the law is blocked or not being enforced, the minute that is either overturned or sort of goes away, any abortions provided in that time period, the providers are still liable. So it's very insidious. It's a very, very gross bill. But yes, for right now, there is a temporary injunction.
And as far as I know, what I've read, that there have been a couple of lawsuits in this vein, and they were from out of state too. I think both were from Arkansas, maybe, and they were basically debarred attorneys. They're not even legitimate attorneys anymore, as far as I read, who were basically challenging folks. And then there was a doctor who put himself out there to be challenged and says, look, I'll take this on. I provide abortions. It's essential health care. Come at me, bro. That kind of thing. And so I don't know if there's been any movement there. Lawsuits, obviously, they take a long time. This is essentially just a scare tactic to scare providers and scare women who would otherwise have this procedure. So I guess this is all in the courts now on both sides, right? And so we're just going to have to see what happens. But
right, and the state of Texas did file our indicted attorney general. He did immediately file an appeal with the Fifth Circuit, which is a notoriously conservative court that we are under jurisdiction of. So we'll see about that. But I mean, this bill has been on the books now for a little over 5 weeks, and it's really had a lot of catastrophic events. I have a story upcoming with an OBGYN. She testified at the House committee last week. She'd also written for the New York Times just about her experience as an abortion provider. But you're seeing patients right now who are being impacted by this. We know that there are clinics in neighboring states, places like Oklahoma, New Mexico. They're already booked for this month. And I mean, you're talking about traveling out of state. That's a lot of money. That's, think about childcare costs, just trying to do all this logistical stuff. So and that was something that I think Judge Pittman really emphasized in his ruling, is just how disastrous this law is, and how it is like just intentionally stoking fear for people who need services and providers.
And in my understanding, though, that there were some things going on at the federal level with the Biden administration, essentially to try to quell this, particularly the fear mongering part of this, under a law that essentially says something to the effect that if somebody is being intimidated against expressing a right that's guaranteed at the federal level, that is basically an invalid law to some degree. I think that was sort of the nature of the federal action that they're trying to take to protect women in Texas.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and certainly there is actually also some legislation, the Women's Health Protection Act, once again, we are sort of beholden to the filibuster in the Senate, so that kind of seems dead on arrival there. But this is a completely untenable situation. And I think that people are very much looking for a federal solution for something like Texas. Because remember that, a lot of states are looking at this law, trying to adopt it for their own states. In many ways, Texas is sort of like ground zero in that regard. And that should worry, I think, everyone.
It should, because we're the second most populous state in the nation. And, we used to look at what we consider backwater states like Alabama and Mississippi doing this kind of stuff and always, being a little bit more embarrassing than Texas. And that's just not the case anymore. And in fact, they're trying to pass like something like a 12-week or 16-week or something like that in Mississippi. So they're way behind, as it were, with Texas, with how extreme our law is. And so, it's really unfortunate. And for folks who are relying on the federal government, even in the situation we're in, is pretty scary, because we have a razor thin majority in the House, and we could lose it in the next couple of years because of redistricting that we're seeing right now. Republicans who control most state legislatures are doing everything they can to tilt the scales in their favor to make sure that they can regain Congress next year. And as you mentioned, in the Senate, again, a razor thin margin of one vote, with two senators that are acting essentially as Republicans and holdouts on this really important stuff. And, I actually shared this on my Instagram earlier today. I think it was a graphic that showed the United States split up into groups of full states, complete states, roughly 6 states or 7 states or 7 groupings of states that were about 50 million people each. And California, Nevada, and Arizona are 49.7 million people. And then you have a group of states that's Alaska, Hawaii, Washington, Oregon, Idaho, Montana, Colorado, North Dakota, South Dakota, Nebraska, Missouri, Iowa, and Minnesota equals only 48 million. And I did the math on this. It wasn't hard. Those 3 states, 6 U.S. senators. Those 32 or those other 48 million, 32 senators. And so
we absolutely do not need 2 Dakotas. This is
yeah, absolutely. I am pro the unification of Dakota.
One Dakota.
Yes, yes, exactly. One Dakota. We only need one Dakota, folks. And so, that just shows you how unfair and unbalanced the Senate is. And if we as Democrats represent by far a majority of U.S. Citizens with even less than 50% of the states. But I mean, in this case, it's so stark. It's like, about 16, 17 or so states have roughly the same population as 3 states, and yet they have like something like 5 times the number of representation in the Senate. And that's just the kind of battles that we have to deal with, while conservatives completely complain about being silenced on social media. So, this whole idea of the idea of this being any kind of balance or whatever, or 2 sides or both sides, is completely wrong. Our government is heavily tilted towards conservative ideology,
and getting worse too. In 20 years, I think they're projecting where it's something like 17% of the population is just going to have like 20 senators.
Exactly. Good. I mean, and it's ironic in a country that we supposedly have a meritocracy. So if you're a state and you're doing a great job of attracting more people, attracting jobs, people want to live there, you're actually penalized because your vote continues to get diluted and diluted and diluted, while other states like the Dakotas or some of these other states that for 100 years have not grown their population, they're actually rewarded by having a higher percentage of representation. And so the system is completely backwards. I mean, when we
And if
make
you're part of that 700,000 in District of Columbia, you don't even get
you get
your vote.
zero representation. Yeah. And they have a population that's bigger than several states. So yeah, I mean the way that the it's tilted towards conservatives, and yet progressives and even centrists are make up a huge chunk of the population and growing, and yet their political will is shrinking, is unsustainable, and really just adds to this feeling that democracy isn't working here, and it's because it's not set up to work.
This is when someone like Ted Cruz would point out we're not a democracy, we're a republic.
Yeah. Well, even in a
He's,
republic,
he's done that. He's done that before.
oh, absolutely. I mean, even in a republic, the idea is that we elect people to represent us. And that's simply what's not happening, as we see with redistricting. So we are going through redistricting in Texas right now. We are in our third special session. And the first sort of floor debate is going to be taking place on the House maps on Tuesday. And so they will be debating these maps. I think some of the arguments you're going to hear about are why you're seeing if 95% of the growth in the state has been people of color, why the actual number of districts with majority white representation has grown. And they're going to ask these questions. And you probably saw that the chair of the Senate Redistricting Committee, which is Joan Huffman, said she has not seen this data. She has no idea that that's a fact.
I believe she also noted that these maps were colorblind,
Yes,
which
race blind.
actually,
Yes,
race
exactly.
blind. Excuse me, race blind. Which in a couple of years ago, the Voting Rights Act would have said, "Oh no, 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 no,
Yeah.
ma'am." But we don't have the Voting Rights Act
Well,
anymore.
it's really interesting how, if they were race blind, how they managed to bolster the white population's representation, just blindly, literally blindly, just total coincidence that they actually paired two African American members of Congress who are long-standing members, who represent their district, in that whole Republican form of government, has been taken away from those constituents. And so they don't have the right to elect who they want to elect anymore, because they were just simply drawn out of their districts and paired. And then there was this other district on the House maps, which are going to be debated on Tuesday. I don't know if you saw this, but Bell County, where the biggest army base in the United States, is basically, they drew a House district around the base, and it's completely surrounded by another House district, and they're calling it the Donut District, because it's a district completely surrounded by another district. I've never even seen that before. I've seen ones that stretch and they bend and they curve and they go in out of these crevices of little neighborhoods, but I've never seen anything like that.
Yeah, I've never seen that either. It made me a little hungry. I'm not gonna lie. Been trying to watch my food, so I was like, oh, I would
Yeah.
like a donut right now. But yeah, no, it's completely insane. And somebody else asked like what I thought of some of the other districts, and I don't know if anyone remembers that movie Arrival with Amy Adams, but when she's trying to like communicate with the aliens, they do these little shapes. And so that's what kind of reminds me of some of the districts they drew up in North Texas that are so like convoluted and like these strange little appendages coming out everywhere.
Yeah.
But yeah, the donut district that was something. They find these new and inventive ways to do these maps.
To be awful. Yeah. And the people who live there, I mean, and there's nothing they can say because they did it intentionally. So when somebody says, well, hey, why did you cut my city in half when that was completely unnecessary? The only answer is, well, because that was our way to squeeze another Republican district in. If we would have kept your city whole, which is, again, as you mentioned, part of what the old Voting Rights Act that's been overturned by the Supreme Court would have made sure they did, is simply not there anymore. That requirement is not there anymore. And that's why it was there in the first place, proving it again. We absolutely need another Civil Rights Act. We need to update it because they're back at it on these old games. And so, that is that's sort of where we're at on redistricting. they're doing the House maps, and then we'll see the congressional maps and the Senate maps come up.
I have a bad feeling I'm going to be redistricted out of. As I mentioned last week, I got the trifecta of being redistricted out. So I think that I have a bad feeling I'm gonna go from all Democratic leadership to all Republican.
Unbelievable, without moving an address. That's
No, yeah.
it's a pretty neat trick, Jessica. But and so as we debate the redistricting, there are other members that are out there looking for sort of their next gig and what they're going to do, because they're being paired and drawn out of districts. It's a lot of some Democrats. I think we've talked about how we talked about the two African Americans in Houston on the congressional side that were paired together. There are two Latinas in El Paso that were paired together, and it looks like this is sort of political retribution for quorum break. The other major piece of legislation, I guess there are two other pieces of legislation that are going through that we're watching. One is the $16 billion in federal coronavirus aid that came to Texas and could have been distributed by now, but they were so busy trying to pass the voter suppression bills that they haven't gotten to that yet. And so they're just now starting those conversations. It appears they haven't fully made decisions on where they're going to spend that money. Of course, everybody has different ideas about where that 16 billion should go. It sounds like the Senate has begun those conversations. The House has also begun theirs. From what I understand, they're about 80% in agreement on where that money should go. But then it's going to have to, be reconciled past both chambers. And surely it won't go to the things that we would want it to go to: healthcare, unemployment benefits, things that actually help people. Schools need help right now. And so who knows what they're going to ultimately end up spending that money on, but we'll keep an eye on that. And so this could also help us drag into another special session later on. And so because these special sessions can max last 30 days, a month, if they go past that, then they have to call it another special session. And so what we're hearing on the redistricting front is that it's very likely they're going to do another special session after this one, and cover those issues.
It's like a horrible riff on that Oprah saying, you get a special session,
yeah,
you get a
exactly.
special session.
Everybody gets a special session. That's right. Yeah. What do you got? So the other bill that we're watching is the trans sports bill, which reared its ugly head one more time. They brought that bill back. I think on the House side, they're trying to stop that, the speaker. But the sad thing is it seems like Dan Patrick is truly the person who's in charge of our government, not Governor Abbott. If anybody else, it's Donald Trump. And so between Donald Trump and Dan Patrick, that's the government Texas is getting. And so this is a priority bill for him. Do you have any particular updates on where we're at on that trans bill?
Sure. So they held testimony on Wednesday, and there's a lot of heartbreaking testimony from parents, from children, basically. And then also the bill's author, a woman named Swanson. I've forgotten her first name, and I don't really care. She, she actually also basically admitted that there has never been a situation in Texas where a trans student has quote unquote disrupted any sporting event or, taken it. And that's kind of the argument that they've said, like, oh, if we allow, these trans students to participate in sports, it is just going to destroy women's sports, which is contrary to actually what pretty much every major female athlete has to say on this. And so the Swanson lady basically said, there hasn't ever actually been an example of this, but we're trying to prevent it. So we're preventing this, even though there's no case here. But so it did pass out of the House committee, and as you said, there is like some tension, I think, even with Republicans in the House about this. But Dan, this is a huge priority for Dan Patrick. It was a big priority for Abbott too, to acquiesce. So he put this on the special sessions calendar. It's just a very cruel, heartless bill and in solution of a problem that doesn't exist, that is ultimately going to have heartbreaking effects
Yeah,
for many people.
exactly. I mean, just traumatizing people intentionally for no real benefit is what's happening here. Um, and so let's talk about our favorite person we haven't talked about in a while, Donald Trump. So Donald Trump has been sort of, apparently he's really bored because he just keeps dipping into Texas politics over the last couple of weeks. We saw
That's what happens when he gets banned from social media. He's gotta find other outlets.
exactly. And so Texas is he's playing in our sandbox. He, just over the last few weeks, we've talked about this a couple times, how he's been pressuring Abbott on these audits that he wants to see happen all over the country, but even all over Texas, where he won by a couple 100,000 votes. He still wants to see every county audited, and he's telling Abbott that he needs to put the audit on the call for special session and tackle the audit situation here in Texas, which is unnecessary again. But he's also playing in primary politics in Texas. So, as I mentioned, the redistricting maps are a great opportunity for the people in charge to dole out sort of punishment and political retribution to people that they've had issue with, not supporting the things, that not getting in line. One of those people is Republican Senator Kel Seliger from West Texas. So he is a former Amarillo mayor. And so he hasn't been a big fan of all the attacks on local control that have taken place in Dan Patrick's Senate. So they see this as a great opportunity to get rid of him and find somebody that'll play ball a little bit more. And so what we understand at this point is that it looks like Dan Patrick put a call into former President Donald Trump and asked him to insert himself into this Republican primary and endorse one of Kel Seliger's opponents. And now, because of how powerful that Trump endorsement is in Republican primary politics, Kel Seliger is considering whether he even wants to run for re-election again, looking at these maps. And so, that's just sort of the power of persuasion. That's the power that Trump still has over the Republican Party, even in the state of Texas.
I have a feeling we're going to be seeing a lot more of Trump endorsements as we head toward the Republican primary. And we're probably going to see a lot of just brace yourselves, folks. It's going to get real embarrassing real quick out there in MAGA land.
Yeah. I mean, so, one of other Trump's major priorities, of course, was the border wall. We saw Abbott go down and put on a show with other Republican governors just the other day and do this big press thing where he got literally like 10 or so Republican governors from around the country.
It caused quite a kerfuffle in Idaho. I don't know if folks have been following this, but there's a huge tension between the governor and lieutenant governor. They apparently you don't sort of run as a unit with them. But yeah, the lieutenant governor, while the governor was down in Texas, tried to send their Idaho National Guard and to the border. If you think Texas politics is wild, just that Idaho stuff is next level.
Yeah. I mean, it's amazing, how dangerous these folks can be. Like at one point, it's all rhetoric. It's all, it's sort of dangerous rhetoric because you could have these like lone wolf types go out and do crazy stuff like what we saw in El Paso based on, what politicians are saying to stoke these people up. But then when you get people like that in power, they activate the National Guard to come down to another state. That is wild. And that's just a preview of sort of the dangerous stuff that's in store if this Trumpism continues around the country and we don't really, get our hands around this stuff. And it also shows the power of just a few people and what they can do, because Governor Abbott set up this basically is like a GoFundMe for the wall, right? Which we saw that fail once already, but for some reason he thought, let's do that again.
And actually landed Steve Bannon under arrest.
Yeah.
Pardoned. But.
Yeah, exactly. So, there's no accountability for these folks. They do whatever they want, even if it looks like for a hot minute they're going to be in trouble. there comes your pardon. They always get away with it. So much for law and order. But anyways, so Abbott set up this essentially GoFundMe campaign through the state government, and so that anyone can donate to build the wall. Well, he got $54 million in donations, which sounds like a lot, right? Well, it turns out that 98% of that came from one person, and is not even a Texan. So this billionaire, heir, I guess, of the Mellon banking firm, for that family, he's donated over $50 million to the border wall in Texas. So one donor.
Yeah, his name is Timothy Mellon. He is the grandson of the banking tycoon.
There you go.
He's currently the chair of something called Pan Am Systems. I don't know if that has anything to do with the former. So I guess it was sort of a brand that was bought after Pan Am Airways was bankrupt. But Mr. Mellon is also an author. He wrote an autobiography. I don't know what he has to say. It probably won't surprise you to know he's also pretty racist. So he is a critic of many of the New Deal programs, and he had a lot of things to say about people of color using social safety nets. Just an FYI on this fine individual who has funded our border wall.
I could probably use my imagination and come up with a few things he's probably thought about. I imagine he's also not a big fan of critical race theory. And we've seen that conversation come up a lot. And I feel like, it's very interesting because at first it was last year was conservatives dominating, talking about riots everywhere, Black Lives Matter, Antifa, riots going on. And then they were very quiet about what we saw on January 6th. In fact, now the narrative is that those people are somehow heroes or something like that on the right. But what we've seen since, with the critical race theory and then the mask mandates going on at school boards everywhere, we've seen right-wing parents who have been brainwashed with this stuff, go up and create violent situations in schools and at school board meetings. And we're not really seeing a lot from the right to quell this. And in fact, they're doing the opposite because apparently Biden made some statement, or I think Merrick Garland put out some kind of statement that essentially says we're protect schools against parents who become violent at these events.
Yeah, it's guidance basically to the U.S. attorneys of the country, just to sort of note that we understand that many school board members or principals or faculty are under threat at this moment. So just for the U.S. attorneys, just like keep your be aware of this, and just know that the federal government is here to help.
And so the narrative I've seen on the right-wing media or Twitterverse is to that effect of like, oh, we're criminalizing parents now who are concerned. So they're not rioters, they're just concerned parents. They're so concerned that they're threatening violence on individual administrators. And we saw just last week here in Austin, the Travis County Democratic Party, my old office actually, was firebombed by some lunatic who believes in all this stuff. And he left a note, which is an idiot because he tied it literally to the incendiary device. But part of the note that they could read essentially said that this is only a warning. This is just a beginning. And then ironically, the bar across the street, somebody working there was really helped tip off what happened and was able to help catch this guy. That bar.
They were also able to douse the really early the flames from that incendiary device, and really prevented widespread damage to that building.
And it's interesting, it's actually my next door neighbor's bar. He actually owns that bar. I actually been meaning to just text him and say, hey, thanks, I saw what you guys did, and maybe I should just go in there. But
get him a drink.
Yeah, exactly. Man, yeah, we owe you around big time. But I mean, this is the definition, textbook definition of domestic terrorism, is politically motivated, it's violent, it's destructive, and this guy has been arrested, and so obviously we'll be keeping close tabs on whether anything actually happens. Again, accountability seems to escape these people, and so we'll keep watching very closely to what happens to this guy. And so I'm really glad he was caught. So glad he was caught. They're smart enough to have cameras out there now and security and stuff. So he had his face covered. The only time you may see some of these conservatives wearing masks, unfortunately, but he had his face covered in an American flag type, covering. And so it's awful. The rhetoric definitely motivates people, as we've seen, and drives people to do these crazy things. It's getting violent out there, just for people who want to express their political beliefs, which is really the foundation of what a republic is about. And our First Amendment is the First Amendment for a reason. And so it's scary to me that conservatives like to forget about the First Amendment and concentrate on the second one, because the second one can get out of hand very quickly. And I don't think I trust their judgment on when they use that Second Amendment, unfortunately, anymore. Um, so we have a lot of work to do, but
Yeah, yeah. But no, you're right. And I talked with the executive director of the Travis County Democratic Party, and she was very adamant that this wasn't the first time that their office has been threatened. This was the first time that arson was involved.
right.
But they are committed to electing Democrats, and
Hmm.
that's what they're there for. Another thing she did note was she heard from one Republican official, but as of pretty much 24 hours had passed when I talked with her, and still there wasn't anything from the Travis County GOP. There was really
Mm-mm.
nothing
You know,
from.
sorry to cut you off. I just get really excited about this, but the ironic thing about the Travis County GOP is they're the ones pushing the police, quote unquote, police reform proposition that's going through Austin, and it's on the ballot for this November. And essentially, it ties police funding to population, and it's threatening to essentially bankrupt the city, or at least have to shift priorities from libraries and parks and things like that to strictly just based on not need, but literally based on this formula that isn't any kind of scientific or need based formula. And so they are out there pushing that, oh, cops response rates are too low and we need more police out on the street. And meanwhile, these people that are responding to their rhetoric are the ones that are firebombing their opposition's headquarters. So yeah, I think this stuff really needs to be pointed out, and we actually did on the Signal earlier this week. I recorded a podcast with one of the leaders of that movement to basically vote down that proposition. There are over 100 local organizations in the city of Austin, from labor to women's issues to environmental issues, who are opposed to Prop 1. The parks, all the parks foundations, everybody who's like very interested in community in the city of Austin is seems to be opposed to Prop A. And so that's the real story, and it's being pushed by these Republicans. And one of the biggest narratives that has come out of this on their side is that George Soros is opposed to Prop A, and he's dumping all this foreign money, and it's a lot of this kind of like under the surface anti-Semitic kind of stuff that we've seen across the country when it comes to George Soros and anything he's ever done.
Yeah, anytime George Soros gets mentioned, you're like, oh, brace yourself. This is going to get really anti-Semitic really quickly.
Yeah, exactly. It's only a matter of time. So you've probably heard of Godwins Law, right? Which is basically Godwin's Law is the longer an online conversation goes on, the more likely it is that someone or something will be compared to Nazis or Hitler. And it's the same thing with George Soros. The moment his name comes up, it's only a matter of time before something really cringy and anti-Semitic it comes behind it. And so that's what we're seeing in Austin right now. It's very dirty, and we really have have got to defeat this at a very high level, so that it's a tactic that they see is not going to work in the future.
Mhm. Yeah, well, we'll keep an eye out and definitely check out that conversation. The just episode prior for SignalCast.
Yeah, with the Austin Justice Coalition. So, is there anything else you'd like to mention on the cast before we wrap it up?
I think that's about it. We'll keep an eye out for what happens with, Senate Bill 8, with our redistricting maps. We've had a lot of stories on Signal. We have an op-ed from a former candidate, Candice Valenzuela, just about her experience running and what redistricting has wrought. So be sure to check that out.
Yeah. And so always want to try to end on a positive note. So the two positive little pieces of news that I have to share are, one, the Women's March took place last Saturday. Of course, there was the national one at DC, and then there were, other versions all throughout the country. And in Texas, I saw huge turnouts in Houston and in Dallas and San Antonio. And here in Austin, we had the one count I saw was over 30,000. And so it certainly looks like it from the pictures. I've saw a long time politicos who operate within the Capitol say this is the largest event they've ever seen take place on the Capitol grounds. And that just means that people are responding to what these Republicans are doing, and we see that reflecting in the polls. But it's always better to see that reflected on the ground and see actual people come out on a Saturday morning at 8 a.m. And show support for changing this state government.
I really loved seeing that there are also, smaller rallies in places like Lubbock and Seagoville.
That's true.
So that was something that I thought was good, where, if you even have just a couple of folks that are out there, especially a place like Lubbock, where they actually have, they did a ban on abortion. They did the sanctuary for unborn thing a couple of weeks ago. So that for me was what I really liked.
Yeah. Well, awesome. Well, I think it is important that we highlight what's going on outside of the urban areas, because, we're racking up the votes within the urban areas, and then redistricting, they just crack them and stretch them all the way out to rural areas to diminish our voting strength. And so it really is important that we talk to folks out there about why this is not good for them either. Because if your representative has to think about, a dense urban environment like Austin, but also rural farmers out in West Texas, and this is the same person, that really takes away the whole point of the representative government, because who are you actually representing? It's only the party that's on the ballot, and that's who you're really representing in Donald Trump. And so we've got to educate people about why communities of interest are so important, and that's in the redistricting process that's going on right now. So folks, keep that in mind as we go through this, and that you can always contact your representative and tell them how you feel about these maps. There's a lot of folks out there who are paying very close attention to this, and you can get involved. Just to name a few, Texas Civil Rights Project is one that's very involved. You can go to their website. The All on the Line organization, which is Eric Holder's organization, is very active here in the state of Texas on this, and they have ways that you can get involved, testify if you can. And so there are folks out there that are fighting the good fight, and they need you to get in the game. So as always, you can find us at texassignal.com and keep up with some of the latest developments and all these things. We certainly appreciate you joining the conversation on social media, and if you feel so inclined to please become a Patreon at texassignal.com in top right, and basically contribute to make sure that this type of progressive journalism can continue, and we certainly appreciate that. So until next time, later, y'all.
Bye, guys.